Since I've seen so little of it, I think it's pretty much an unknown ideal. And I think it's always going to be a hard one to achieve in a society that's structured along class lines. And we talk a lot about equality in this country. We pass various laws, and those laws really become nothing more than resolutions because those laws are not enforced. It's not legal to not hire an older person in this society. That's a joke. I mean, that's not enforced at all. And the various other laws about discrimination, they're not working very well. And I don't expect for the next 4 years they'll work very well. So I think equality is nice on paper, but it gets torn up at every workplace, for example, and in the society in general. Whether that means living in a certain neighborhood, and I still see crosses being burned in the Philadelphia area on people's lawns in 1984. I think that a lot of people don't believe in equality. They may talk about it, but I don't think that much of the society really believes in equality. I think some segment of it does, some percentage of it does. But I think a lot of it is acquiescence to what is a nice idea. But the reality of it, I think, is we're a long way off. We've scratched the surface, and as I said, we've passed laws and resolutions and what have you, and made some inroads in some instances. But we're so far from an equal society that is way on the horizon as some great goal, or, you know. But I don't feel that we live in, first of all, as I said before, a just society, and therefore not an equal society.
Equality means to me the elimination of ageism, sexism, and racism. They're all rooted in economic exploitation and injustice. And when we stamp out those societal sicknesses, there will be equality. And I like to think there will be peace and power equitably delivered to the people and affirmed by the people. And this is the goal. This is what this country was founded on. And we've fallen far short of it, but the people can put us back on track.
The fundamental belief in equality is one of the most constant and enduring of our nation's ideals. At Springfield, Abraham Lincoln put it this way: they, the signers of the Declaration of Independence, meant simply to declare the right so that enforcement of it might follow as fast as circumstances should permit. They meant to set up a standard maxim for free society, which would be familiar to all and revered by all, constantly looked to, constantly labored for, and even though never perfectly attained, constantly approximated, and thereby constantly spreading and deepening its influence and augmenting the happiness and value of life to all people of all colors everywhere. The assertion that all men are created equal was of no practical use in effecting our separation from Great Britain, and it was placed in the Declaration not for that, but for future use. Its authors meant it to be, as thank God it is now proving itself, a stumbling block to all those who in after times might seek to turn a free people back into the hateful paths of despotism.
We live in a world, we live in one world, and that world is made up of people who are very different from each other. Different in race and color and class and culture. It's a very diverse scene on a world basis. And right here in Philadelphia, we are a small world. We recapitulate within the boundaries of Philadelphia, the great diversities of our universe. And I like to think that we can, in our city, demonstrate the way in which people who are very different from each other can indeed be friends and advocates of each other and make a changed society that is just and human for all. We ought to be able to do that. There is no shortage of money. It's just in the wrong pockets, that's all.
I feel that we too would like to become part of the city's whole thought on a neighborhood. In other words, we should be able to select the managers. We should be able to monitor maintenance. We should be able to set up some rules, some guidelines, and they should be something that we should have a lot more input. That's the only way you're going to ever get a balance. that the people that's most affected with the problem have to help come up with a solution.
That when I came here in the police department, I think about the first time that I got on the squad car, I got in the squad car where the individual told me, I asked him if he wanted me to drive, and I said, no. He said, I'll drive. So I said, fine. So we get in the squad car, and he says, before I start this car, I want to tell you something. I said, what's that? He said, I don't like Puerto Ricans. So I said to him, look, at $6.50 an hour, I said, I don't care who I'm working with. I said, but let me tell you something. If you beat a Puerto Rican unnecessarily, there'll be one more Puerto Rican jumping on your ass. And that Puerto Rican will have a uniform on. I said, and when I'm done kicking your ass, I'm going to leave you there and bring the squad car back to the district without you. This is the type of mentality that we dealt with at one point. At this time, I don't think it really has changed.
I think that the minority police officers have a more sensitive to the community it serves if you have a large segment of minorities in the community, in which we do here in the city of Philadelphia. So therefore, where you have a majority of white police officers and the minority is not sufficiently or adequately representative, then you have the kind of problems that we had in the police department. You have a police department that's very abusive. You have a police department that shoots first, asks questions second. You have a police department where the officials condone abuse and brutality, and you have all kinds of problems.
One of the institutions we saw is known as Penhurst. And I'm going back to about the 60s, I guess, the late 50s. And when our visit through there and we saw what was happening to some of these so-called SBI children, it was just a horror story. They were housed in wards just like cattle. In fact, even worse than cattle. They slept in cots, and in the morning they were hosed down. They weren't toilet trained, they were just hosed down. And when they fed them in troughs. They dumped the food into troughs just like they do with pigs or any animals. It was then and there that we decided that our sons will never enter an institution, if we can help it.
It was the most harrowing and frightening situation of my life when I first visited Penhurst. And it was there, right then, that we decided our children would stay home. And they would be with us, and we would do the best we could for them at home. And see that some kind of aid would be provided on the outside.
The Founding Fathers were acutely aware of the fragility of a democracy, of the constant vigilance and active participation required of citizens, not only to protect their rights, but also to keep government aware of its proper responsibilities, functions, and of its mission. Citizen activists and advocates were then and remain today our best defense against tyranny. They guarantee that the nation will not lose sight of the fundamental ideals upon which it was founded. Housewives and heavy machine operators, police officers and factory workers. These are some of the men and women involved in the struggle for greater social justice and equality in the city of Philadelphia. As different as they might be in background and education, they share certain traits in common, including an acute sense of the current inequities in America, and the conviction that it is their responsibility to work for change. The issues range from job discrimination to architectural barriers, clean air to effective schools. But as diverse as they are, they all concern the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Equal respect, equal participation, and a decent share in the Commonwealth. In a phrase, equal citizenship.
In the city of Philadelphia here, we almost, I guess, the minority population, something like 40% now. And I see that as a goal. I think any contractor doing business in this city with my taxpayers' money should be required to have 40% of his workforce should be minority and black. I mean, people don't like to look at quotas and goals and that kind of thing, but you have to look at that. You know, we have to have an ultimate goal that so we can be represented in the building trades and in particular any particular trade. I think we make up, like I say, almost over a third of the population. And it can be done. You know, you look at Temple Project, that project. All of the hours in the past 18 months 42% of those hours have been worked by minorities and females. And even if you take the unskilled trade out, and I've done that, I've calculated all of the hours for just the skilled trades, which are predominantly white, and we work 32% of the hours on Temple, and that's an accomplishment. And I'd like to see that applied to any major project here in this area. You know, they're about to begin a $2 billion spending over the next 5 to 8 years on major construction projects in this area. You look at projects like the Convention Center, this trash to steam plant, and Vine Street Expressway. All those will be city projects, and we should get a percentage.
When I was younger, we were always going through a series of firsts. First Negro to walk down Chestnut Street backward, or something like that. And now we've accomplished a lot of firsts, you know, first black mayor, first black superintendent of schools, first. And now we move now beyond symbols. We move now to a full participation in the life of this city and of this country. And this is what many folks don't understand, that there is more than one revolution going on in this country. It is not, quote, a conservative revolution. It's not a liberal revolution, but there's a revolution of self-respect going on in this country, and blacks and women and Hispanics are not ever going to deal with from a self-degrading system again.
We're basically fighting for the right to be accepted into the mainstream of society. Disabled people have always been looked on as being second-class citizens, and I think we're fighting for the right to be out there just like anyone else in terms of getting an education, getting employment, just being the average person. That just because you happen to use a wheelchair or happen to use crutches or some other type of aid or appliance, that doesn't lessen you as a person. And that's the theme that we're trying to get across to folks.
My own self-respect, my recognition that I am a viable human being, that I've worked all my adult life, and I intend to get the same respect. A lot of things are personal with me. My husband and I recently signed an agreement of sale, and typical in agreement of sales, my husband's first name is Gerald, so it'll say Gerald Brace and H.W. I say, wait a minute, time out. I'll never be an H.W. because H.W. means his wife. I said, put both our names on there. And, you know, I think there were 15 people in the room, and they all looked at each other. I said, yes, ma'am. And they, you know, it's not that important per se, but it's symbolic. I'm not an H.W.
Most people feel you can't fight City Hall. I did myself. Years ago, I would have said the same thing. But you can. You can fight them. You might go for years and not get nowhere. But if you're persistent, they start listening. I don't wait for the next guy. If something is not to my liking, I am known to be very outspoken. I would become involved in anything that has to do with my community. I guess I'd be called newsy maybe because of it. But I couldn't stand by and see someone, like if you lived next door to me and I went out and saw a kid on your car, I'd become involved. Because that kid has no business, even if you have a junker, you have what you can afford. And if you let this go with this incinerator like this, you are just bringing us down lower and lower, and we're trying to build ourselves up. They're finding dioxin, which is cancer-causing, something that we have said from the very beginning that had to be there, and they always denied. Now they have proof that it has been found there. So now they're doing testing to see. They keep telling us it has done no harm to any of our people, but this we don't buy because they never tested any of our people.
To be a citizen is not really just to have been born here and to live here. To be a citizen, you have to participate. And to be a neighbor is not just a matter of living next door to someone. You have to care about the person who's living next to you.
I think as a worker, other than at the let's say the last 6 or so years that I worked in factories, when I became active in union, though I was always a member for most of those years, 20 years I worked in factories, I sort of had blinders on. And you know, you go to work every day, you raise your kids, you get a couple beers with the guys, you watch some sports, what have you. You don't really read into the politics of the city, let alone the country or international stuff. And the more I got involved, the more I began to see what misinformation the public gets, what screwing the public gets from federal bureaucracies, state bureaucracies, what have you, and employers in general, at least what I've seen. There may be some nice employers out there, I just don't get the chance to meet them. That it broadened my vision of, and my feelings about, toward women, toward minorities, of course about the labor movement, and in almost all areas where people have their rights violated. It really opened my eyes to a lot of things, because one thing leads to another. If you get involved in unionism, you're going to end up involved in women's rights. You're going to end up involved in the rights of black people, and so forth and so on. And it just keeps expanding itself. And then you begin to see the loss of jobs here, where those jobs are transferred to, and that we all work for the same employer, regardless of what country it is, and that they're stealing your job from here and they're putting it in El Salvador or whatever and shooting the first person that talks about a union. All those things become connected. The whole thing becomes connected, and dictatorships around the world are all related to that. What's done with our tax monies. It all ties together after a while, and the problem with it is there's not enough of you to go around.
I like the community better than Penhurst because you have a lot more freedom out here in the outside world. And I'm also, a lot of people who lives in institutions, their parents think that it's bad for them to leave the institution because they're going to get hit by a car. But that's not true. And I'm out here trying to help the parents and everyone, plus the people that are in the institution, to tell them it's not bad to be out in the community. If you're in a small setting, you could learn more than you can when you live with a whole bunch of people. Since I've been out in the community, I learned how to speak up for myself more, and that's what Speaking for Ourselves has taught me, that I don't have to be quiet about everything. I need to learn a little bit more about that, but it's working.
I am sort of a church person, and some things come to you very clear, you know, and you get the determination to do something about it. And that was my determination on this particular case, was to move. I saw it, we had a chance of winning the case if we stuck together, and this was my reason for sticking with it. Not so much what I got out of it, but I was concerned about the brothers. I mean, I look at the union as being a brother union, but it turned out, happened not to be that, just that kind of thing. So after we set aside this group, I thought it was good to knit ourselves together and to do something constructive that will go down in history, not only in history, but it will benefit some of the future people that might be coming on in the workforce elsewhere, not just for today, but tomorrow.
It was during that period of time when we were in school, those 6 weeks, that we found that these children who had never been out of the house, who had never been part of society, who had never had chance to intermingle, they had the ability to do this if they were trained. We saw in the 6 weeks' time, we saw children being toilet trained. We saw children walking that we never dreamed would walk before. We saw them eating food by themselves from a table and a plate and a spoon or fork for the first time. We saw them socialize for the first time, catch a ball for the first time, put their hat on, put their shoes on. We saw all this happening to these young people whom the school system and whom everyone else had said, no, they will never be anything. And I guess it was that period of time where we knew that it couldn't stop. It had to continue.
A lot of people think I'm crazy. You know, why are you beating your head, going through all the frustration of, you know, trying to turn this thing around when I have a skill. I don't have to be working for the Urban Coalition. I'm not making the money that I would be making. You know, my family suffers somewhat. I got my wife worries about me. I'm a sort of like a key figure. You know, everybody knows John Dent's doing this. I've, you know, been through, endured the wrath of some of my white union members. You know, I've been involved in physical violence. I've been beaten. You know, and they asked me, well, why do you do this? You know, you don't have to do this. And why don't you think about your family? I have a wife, and I have two little girls, you know, that I'm trying to raise. But I don't know. You know, it goes way back, even before I had the family, I guess. You know, I remember the things that I used to go through. I used to go to project after project, and you know, you have hundreds of skilled craftsmen on a project, and sometimes I would be the only black skilled craft on that job, craftsman. You know, I couldn't find a black plumber, steam fitter, electrician. You know, and those things are embedded in my mind. I remember those days back in the 60s and early 70s. You know, and things haven't changed that much, you know. Sure, you go to a project now and you will see token few, you'll see some, but it hasn't changed that much. And I don't know, I'm just resolved to see that situation changes.
I think equality is more of a goal than a reality. It means that we must do every single thing possible to make that everyone has the opportunity to exercise his talents up to the maximum of his ability. He may not, or she may not be equal to, someone else who has more talent. But if they are exercising the maximum of their ability and participating to the maximum of their strengths, then I believe that's how we move towards equality. I believe equality is one of those things that will never be fully attained, but it's a brilliant and excellent goal to follow.
When I talk about equality, I guess in terms of the issue that I'm working on, what it means to me is equal protection under the law, equal protection from hazardous pollutants that can really adversely affect a person's health. And equal access to information that is valuable in the decision-making process. An opportunity to be heard. I think that may be a key thing, an opportunity to be heard. I think people do have very fundamentally a sense of what is right and wrong in their communities, a strong sense when their rights are being violated. And I think that just like the person who has all the opportunities and the power, community people who by and large don't have as many of those resources should have the opportunity to express their own sense of outrage, their own sense of how things have hurt them and how things could be better.
When we see equality, we see a police department that reflects the community in which it serves. We see a police department that have adequate number and sufficient number and an equitable number of minorities in policymaking positions. That's equality. We have talk of equality. We have talk of equal opportunity. But equal opportunity do not always get you into the policy levels of the police department, into the hiring. And until you have that, then you don't have equality. And I think that's what equality is. When we say that our city reflects the kind of, or our police department reflects the population of our city, then you have equality in all levels.
My whole idea, and maybe I'm back in the dark ages, but I think that if you happen to have a neighborhood school and it happens to be all black or all white or all Hispanic, make things in that particular school very good and educate the children, no matter what race. I think that if you look at the population in Philadelphia, there are not a lot of rich people. And the people that are going to attend the public schools are going to be the workers or the welfare people in the city. And I think we're going to have to do something to remedy the welfare side of it. And I think that if everybody makes an effort and is aware of how much these children can contribute to a city the size of Philadelphia, that we have the obligation to educate these children. And I am just an advocate of public school. I think that they're there, we've paid for them, and they can work. They've worked, many fine people have finished public schools in Philadelphia, all over the country. And I think it's the right of a child to have a good education, whether they're rich, poor, black, white, Hispanic, Asian. And we've got to make a commitment to it and fulfill that obligation.
The thinking out there in the public is that since 1968 we have implemented affirmative action. In some cases it's worked, in some cases it hasn't worked. But you have to understand that you got almost 200 years of discrimination that you have to correct. And I don't think, you know, in the matter from 1968 to 1984, that you have corrected them. It's still there. The discrimination's still there. Basically, what you did with discrimination is like a cut. You put a Band-Aid over it, but you didn't put any antiseptic. You'll never be able to cure it without putting the antiseptic. And I think the affirmative action, the use of the proper method of using equal opportunity. Everybody can say he's equal, he believes in equal opportunity. That's great. But when you say in the police department that you believe in equal opportunity, and when you look at the upper structure of our police department and you only find one black who's been appointed by the mayor, where has the equal opportunity been since 1968? And now we're dealing with a department that does not even want to use or even think about using affirmative action. You know, we have a problem, and I'm hoping that, that maybe locally we can correct that problem.
And actually, really what we need is a different culture, ultimately. And that's Brave New World. But I'm 42 years old, okay? I can't do a lot more about this problem. I have to depend on you younger men and women to bring up your daughters in a more sex-neutral way. In other words, give her a Barbie doll, sure, but also give her some challenging mathematical game. That way, when she grows up, and if the divorce rate holds at 50%, you have a 50% chance she'll be home with you. Let's hope that she has some skills in this world so that she can have a better life, because the majority of people in poverty are women, and they're women heads of households. It's a very sad thing to see. See, I've never had the luxury of being isolated from poverty. I have seen it on the streets of Philadelphia. It's part of my job. And it's very, very sad when you go into a house and you see poverty. You see generations of poverty. I'm talking about from the baby to the mother to the grandmother. It's very sad. And it's something that, as a human being, I would like to see corrected.
I think that the retarded child has been the subject of discrimination more than any other reason or person or place or thing in the world. Because from the beginning of time, the retarded child has always been an object of neglect. You can take back to the early histories of mankind itself, that if a retarded child was born, they put him out in the field and forgot him. And that's the one thing that you have to fight today, because today we're getting the same thing with the retarded child as the black people had before when it came to moving in the neighborhoods, you know, and all this sort of stuff. The public would raise all kinds of hell. Today, what they did with the blacks, they're starting to do with the retarded now. Every time they try to open a CLA for a retarded child, the neighbors all around form a committee or something, and they want them put out because the zoning laws don't permit something like this, you know. I just can't understand it. This is, again, another battle. This is going to go into the Supreme Court. It's another battle where the retarded child has to fight once again. And the 14th Amendment applies to everybody. Why do we have to prove that the retarded child is entitled to the 14th Amendment? Why do we have to prove it? He is a citizen of the United States. But you got to go to court to prove it.
Equality means that that I would be, any other minority or any other female would be able to get a fair share of work in the construction industry. That results in that particular minority being able to afford better housing, being able to support a family, and, you know, it has far-reaching effects, as far as I'm concerned. But it starts with employment. I want the young people, and I want to see that drastic rate of unemployment for young people, young black people in this country, really come down. We have to train them and get them into viable employment. So, you know, that's my view of equality, you know. I just keep it within the confines of what I'm working in.
I think one thing that society kind of imposes on disabled people is the right to take chances, the right to risk, the right to, you know, to reach out for that golden apple out there, so to speak. And I think that's really unfortunate. You know, it's true that on one end, disabled people have a lot more obstacles in their way. But if we're not given the opportunity, you know, to utilize the abilities that we do have, it's a resource, you know, that's being denied all of us. And I as an individual can't accept it, and I know a lot of others can't. But I think a lot of this has to penetrate into the community at large.
They too have dreams.
Yes, I'm sure
And
they
nobody
do.
ever listens to what their dreams may be. But together, that kind of collective...
It's control and power.
Yes.
See, if they just figure if they turn things over to the people, to throwaway people, as we often refer to, that it would take power. It's all about power.
Yeah.
But power's in the people, though. Power's in the people. And if you want to see a change, and if you really want to do something, you have to give the power to the people.
And you have to put people first.
People first. People
I
first.
just hope that one day, I'll probably never hear the word affirmative action, or goals, quotas, percentages, court suits, where you have to force someone to bring in a representative number of minorities. I just hope one day that the industry itself and recognize an individual for what he is based on his skills, not on his color, and they will be accepted into a union or into a contractor's workforce where he can support his family economically and not suffer the things that I've suffered the last 20 years.